Welcome to Good Grief. My name is Ariel Nelson, and I am a student here on Brigham Young University, Idaho's campus, currently going into marriage and family studies, and love it so far. I have been learning how to, teach family life education, just about human resources, just all these different things that include the family system.
Yeah, amen to that. I'm Megan Keller. I'm also here at BYU, Brigham Young University, Idaho, also going into marriage and family studies. I want to be a counselor, and I really love just everything that I'm learning here so far because I'm able to apply it into my own life as well as think about what my career will look like in the future. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I love going to school here just because I am learning more about like you said, I can apply these things to my life, and we are sharing this information to hopefully, get you guys to apply to your own lives,
Yeah.
We're like your personal teachers here.
You're welcome.
Anyway, so today we're actually going to be talking about divorce and how does that affect the family system, the family dynamic, and how do people grieve when it comes to divorce?
Yeah, because we really want to try and make sure that we get the point of our whole podcast is to make sure that people understand that grieving is good and
it is
it's
normal.
Okay. Yeah, yes. It can be comfortable and it doesn't have to be a weird topic to talk about, especially surrounding divorce, because I think in some cultures you just don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. You just don't mention the fact that you separated or got a divorce, or even if your marriage is hard, it's just uncomfortable to talk about, so you don't talk about it, which is not healthy because then you're not able to grieve properly, and then it provides a whole nother set of problems physically, mentally, and even spiritually, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially in the United States, we see a rising rate of divorce. I think there's literally more than 50% of couples end up divorcing after the first 7 years of marriage. And that's a little scary, I think. Mm-hmm. If you were to walk into a room of 4 couples, 2 of those couples are going to eventually, from what statistics are saying, would probably divorce.
Yeah,
and that's
so sad.
It is really sad. When you get married, you think my life is going to be perfect. This is the person I'm going to be with for the rest of my life, and we're going to have such a great time. We're going to build a family, and you just have all these expectations of good, Yep. And then eventually, unfortunately, divorce happens, and people don't know how to go through that. They don't understand why they're feeling the way that they feel, whether that's anger, whether that's resentment, sadness, grief, whether they laugh at the situation. They're like, holy, that was a crazy time. There's just so many different ways that people look at their divorce. And I think the majority of the time people do grieve. At some point or the other, someone is crying, at the end of the situation.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also, as a disclaimer in this episode, we're not going to talk about necessarily how to prevent divorce, but rather when divorce, the things leading up to why we have divorce in our society, why it's hard to accept divorce in our society, and why we should grieve divorce in our society. And so I am for sure pro-marriage, and I believe that you can make it through and do hard things. But in this episode, we're specifically talking about that grief that comes from any kind of divorce.
Yeah, for sure. So to start out, I want to specifically talk about what is divorce. And we pulled this from an article, just a simple definition of what divorce is. And I'm sure everyone knows what it is. It's just to give it to you guys. A divorce formally dissolves a legal marriage. So that thing, that bond, that commitment that you guys made, it's dissolved. It's no longer legally shown through papers that you are together with someone. Mm-hmm. And with divorce, there are two different types of divorce. There's absolute divorce and a limited divorce. So an absolute divorce is when a judicial termination of a legal marriage, and it's basically I can't speak, a judicial termination of a legal marriage and reverts both parties back to the state of single in the eyes of the law. And then there's the limited divorce, which is it's result in termination of the right to cohabitate, but the court refrains from officially dissolving the marriage and the parties' statuses remain unchanged. So just to give you guys an idea, there's two different divorces, which I didn't even know about. And so I did some research. Yeah. So yeah, I think the most common one is definitely the absolute divorce, where, you know, after you both decide that it's just not going to work out, basically the law says, all right, you guys are no longer married.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the definition and these other definitions of like absolute divorce and limited divorce seem pretty, you know, done and like simple and like you just cut it off with scissors and that's it. But it really is, it can be really messy, especially for different cases. Even if you had a really good relationship still, it can still be messy with all the different aspects that tie into divorce. And a quote from Emery and Dillon in 1994, they say, divorce is not a single event, but a process of change that can extend over long periods of time. And I think this applies to, I mean, physically, it can be difficult to figure out assets, the home situation, especially if you have kids. And then emotionally, there's a lot of emotions that go into divorce, just like a lot of emotions go into a marriage. And so this can take a lot of time to figure out and to cope with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's really sad when people do go through divorce. I mean, you might think, oh, this is going to change everything. But in reality, if you do have children with your spouse, you're going to have to communicate with that spouse for who knows how long, depending on the situation, you know, which means that you're never going to fully be able to break off what may have been hurting you in the past, what has been, I guess, just on your mind that made you, like, the reason why you divorced might still be in that relationship, even though you thought, well, I'm getting divorced, you know, I'm not going to have to deal with that anymore. For example, when my parents got divorced, it was really hard for me as a child, but I was able to see how, my situation, I am grateful that my parents got divorced, you know, it was still extremely hard, but I could see the benefits that came of it. And unfortunately, my mom did have to communicate some things with my dad, and it made it hard for her. You know, sometimes it's hard to deal and communicate things that are really like close to the heart, you know, which is why divorce can be an ongoing process of grief. You know, you're just constantly having to go through those breaks. You know, you think, oh, my life is finally good, and then something might happen in that relationship where it's just like, what? Like, I just wasn't expecting that, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it can be just like you said, there's multiple levels of things that you have to communicate with your ex-spouse about, and it can just be opening up the wound again. And that is so hard. I mean, it definitely, like, you build up, as an analogy, you build up scar tissue, you build up calluses in some aspects, but in some other aspects, it can even affect your other relationships with other people, because you have to break those bonds. And I think this also goes into, even if you're not completely, like, if you just never got married, but you were cohabitating with each other for a really long time, that this still applies. Like, this still, because, you know, you get together, you share an apartment, you share a Spotify account or like a bank account,
Netflix,
you know, you have to talk about these things when you separate. Like, when you break up, you have to break up these other things too, and it can be a lot more difficult. So I think it applies to people being divorced or even just separating from cohabitation.
Yeah, I think when people get divorced, they might think, okay, my life's going to be better. But in reality, every single divorce, there is pain. And so why is there so much pain? And from the same article that we took about how divorce is not a single event, both Emery and Dylan, they explained why divorce is so painful. And they said this here: boundaries are negotiated over time in a marriage based on pre-existing expectations, direct discussions about rules and roles, and particularly the actions of family members. In divorce, a major goal is to redefine these boundaries. Boundaries are difficult to renegotiate following a mental separation. However, because of uncertain normative expectations, intense and painful emotions, incompatible desires, limited contact and communication, and loyalty dilemmas, the result often is an extended period of intense interpersonal conflict and inner distress. So basically, it just goes into how boundaries are the reason why divorce is so painful. You literally have to reprogram the entire system and functioning of your life, your family's life, and those that were affected or that were in your lives together, whether that's friends, family, you know. Like my husband right now, he and I, not saying that we're getting a divorce at all, but I'm saying that he and I create, you know, we have friends, we've built a life together. And if we were to get a divorce, now all of a sudden my friends are affected that we've created together, you know, that we've, you know, bonded together with. My family is affected. Just all these different boundaries and rules and roles that you've created with this person. Now you have to completely change that. I mean, you might still run into those friends that you made with your husband who might, you know, or wife, depending on who's listening. It's just, you just have to change everything.
Yeah. And it's hard because you realize that your marriage was not just one relationship between you and your spouse. It's really like it turns into a big paradigm of multiple relationships, whether, you know, your relationship with your mother-in-law, your other in-laws, and like your spouse's relationship with your in-laws, your friends, like you were saying. Like they're depending, especially on how long you are together, your world can get a lot bigger, and just that paradigm grows and grows and grows as you're together. And so when it breaks, you have to shift things. It is messy. I know I keep saying that, but it can be really messy because you just have all these other relationships that you essentially have to, you don't have to break them off, but it is different. You kind of have to change those relationships.
Yeah. So it's like trying to find a new way to live your life again, you know. I think it's like a newborn baby, you know. You get divorced, and all of a sudden that layer is just cut off and now you're fresh, you know. I mean, but that fresh wound, it's like a fresh wound. It's not like a fresh baby. It's a fresh wound. And you have to somehow stitch it up and then possibly, you know, find people that will accept you regardless of that, you know, even though you have that wound that is showing still, you know. It's just, it's hard, you know. There's a lot of things that go into it that cause grief. I mean, you're losing that part of you, you're losing that other person as well, even though you might not have gotten along well, or maybe they did something that really hurt you, you're still losing them, you know. And that is why you grieve with divorce.
And I think it can be really vulnerable because it is such a big wound. It can be, you know, like you're kind of self-conscious about it now. Like you have this piece of you that you just don't want to share with anyone. It hurts to share it with other people. You don't know how other people are going to perceive that. And so you, like, the natural thing is to suppress it. But then, you know, it can fester. It can get bigger if you try to suppress it. And it's just not healthy for your own mental stability as well as other people that depend on you. It's not good for their mental stability, just your relationships. There's so many facets why it is good to talk about it in an appropriate way, in a way that's not going to be, you know, degrading on your spouse, but in a way that's going to be more just healthy and I guess, beneficial for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm portraying it in the way that I want to, but it's just good to have those emotions and accept those emotions that come with divorce, as well as doing it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it being so painful is just the perception of our society and the cultures that we live in. That's what can make it really painful and more scary, because there's some cultures that it's totally fine, it's whatever, especially depending on the family you grew up in, it's just normal,
right?
But in other cultures, it's just not part of the history. Like it's not part of what has taken place and what is supposed to happen. You know, these expectations we have of what marriage should look like.
Right. Definitely within the LDS culture, I feel like. I mean, even if, members of the Church of Jesus Christ don't mean to, judge you because of your situation. I just know that when I grew up, I learned so much that, families can be together forever, parents are supposed to be eternal, and you're supposed to live your life forever throughout eternity, So when my parents got divorced, I was like full on crisis mode, like, oh my gosh, like everything's wrong. Like I am being so judged by these people because my parents aren't together anymore, and they have the perfect family and I don't, And so I became like the victim, like all of a sudden I was the person that was being hurt, and I was, people who do go through divorce, you are being hurt, but at the same time, I just had this idea that I wasn't accepted anymore, even though no one did anything wrong, They were there for me. They wanted to be there, be my friends still. It wasn't like they were pushing me away or anything. I just had this idea that I'm not part of this group anymore because of my parents' situation, That was really hard, but
yeah, it can be almost like in your case, almost like self-isolating, because you have these expectations, especially, within any religion, it can be, you have these expectations of what kind of a spouse I'm going to be, what kind of a spouse they're going to be, what our life is going to be like. And it sets those boundaries, like we were talking about. It sets those kind of structured limits, or, just expectations. And so when life happens and those expectations aren't met, you start to really beat up on yourself, as well as even sometimes you can turn and blame your spouse, and which also kind of doesn't help the grieving process, because whether you're self-deprecating or just blaming someone else, that's not grieving. That's not healthy at all by itself. Like, it's good and healthy to recognize where you could have done better, but it's not good to just dwell in it.
Yeah.
And that can be painful to be in and to come out of. It's hard to get out of this blaming ideology, or even just this like, oh, I was so wrong, or like this victim mentality. It can be really painful to try and get out of those holes, because they get so deep especially when you can go through a divorce. Something that I think was interesting is this idea of romance and what romance is supposed to look like. In a book called Beyond the Myth of Marital Happiness by Dr. Blaine Fowers. It's a really good book. Especially chapter 3, because it talks about the history of divorce. And he talks about like the rise of romance. He talks about marriage in a secular model as well as like a religious model. And he just talks about how divorce has affected our history and society, especially within America. He also talks about it in like England and Belgium and just studies that they've done, and just how it has changed, like our perceptions of what marriage looks like and our perceptions of who we are individually have changed throughout years. And I wish I could just read this whole chapter because it is so good. And it just talks about why we have divorce in the first place and why there was a need for separation in families, and how there was just kind of this increase of so he talks about before and how it was arranged marriages and how that's just how it was, and you
sucked it up no matter what.
Yeah, like you got married and it was kind of a business deal, like I'll have my kid marry your kid and then we'll have money, we'll have a party kind of thing. And that's what it was. That's just what marriage was. And then
sometimes I think about how much easier that would be,
Yeah, well, and honestly, like there are some places that still do this.
Yeah.
And it works really well for some of them, and some of them, it doesn't.
Yeah, some of them it just doesn't work out, sadly.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of abuse going on,
Yeah, and it, especially when you have two spouses that really just aren't compatible. Like they're just two very different individuals. And he talks about that. He talks about how there was this rise of individualism and how it kind of happened, especially during the Industrial Revolution, when men just went off to war or went off to factories, to work, like they left the home. And then the women were home to take care of kids, to take care of the house. And humans can really only live in monotony for so long, And so there was this kind of rise in, obviously, like women's rights. Women wanted more of an opportunity to go out and do their own thing. And then men kind of did the same thing. And people have been, throughout the years, of course, we've seen how there is this high prevalence for equal rights and how that affects marriages. And so he talks about what individualism has, how it's affected the romance in our marriages as well as the economy in our marriages. Because we live in a society where we have this consumeristic attitude, mentality, where we feel like, especially in first world countries, we deserve what we deserve.
Right.
And if we don't get what we deserve, then we change something or we just, leave.
Yeah.
And
that's kind of scary. Like, I mean, not that we're going into the causes of divorce, but I mean, if you are married, and your spouse doesn't do something right, you're like, well, I don't deserve that, so I don't want to stay in this marriage anymore, And some people have that mentality. Sometimes it goes, probably a lot more times it is deeper than that, But yeah, I think it's interesting, and it makes me wonder, like, if divorce is becoming more normal. And I think it is, with, the rates rising with divorce. It's just interesting to see how couples, no longer, there are several different reasons why, divorce happens. And one of those reasons is because of a lack of commitment. You think one thing and your spouse thinks the other, and all of a sudden it's like, well, why aren't we on the same page? Like, are we ever going to get on the same page? Do we have the opportunity to get on the same page? And divorce is because you can't get on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really difficult to get past,
Yeah, I think there's just become this acceptance of, I don't need to commit, right? Like, this is my first marriage, so I don't need to commit. And there's almost this acceptance of, okay, yeah, like you don't have to commit right away. Like, you're going to get married and learn.
Right. You should live together before you get married so that you can see how your life's going to be. So don't commit right away. And it's like, well, before your marriage, you have to commit, like, I mean, that's the whole point of getting married is, because you've learned to commit to each other. You've taken it a step further,
Well, and it's just different. Like if you were to rent an apartment, you're not going to go and it's like fully furnished, you just move in. Like you bring your stuff, you move in. If there's like if the wall is like an ugly brown, you're not fully committed because you're just renting the apartment, right? Like you're not going to go and like
paint it,
put shiplap on your wall or, like you might do certain things, but you're really not going to like reestablish your apartment because you are just renting.
Right.
But when you move into a home, like a house, and you take a mortgage out and, like, there's a wall that's not finished. Like
there's holes in the wall, you're going to patch it up because that is your home,
like your level of commitment is just different because you are moving into a house and you kind of have to. So when you go into a marriage and you have this lack of commitment, I think, which like we said has been, I think, more accepted in our society. Of course, you're not going to put that much into it because you already have established your level of commitment.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to like, how does divorce really affect you with the grieving process? I'll never forget when my parents got divorced. I had been homeschooled the majority of my life, elementary through middle school, and I played water polo throughout that time in club. And I really wanted to play in high school, in a public school. And so I asked my mom, I was like, hey, can I be in high school? And it was a big step, here you are homeschooled for the majority of your life. And then going into public school, specifically in high school, like that's a big jump, And I was a freshman. And one night I was told that my parents were getting divorced. And it was like, boom, like huge change. Not only am I going into public school, but now my parents are getting divorced. And now you have to figure out, okay, what are the roles, responsibilities going on with that? And I remember going into school and seeing my best friend and just sobbing. And I was like, my parents are getting divorced. Like, what is wrong with me kind of thing? What did I do? Like the structure that was so stable in my mind has now just fallen apart and I have no idea why, and, of course, when you have parents that don't really get along very well and they have their different opinions, you hear different things every now and then. It's like so confusing, you're like, what am I supposed to think right now? And that person that you depended on, I mean, I think typically in a divorce, the children go to one side of the family, like one person will have more custody over the other parent. And my mom just happened to be that person that had more custody over us than my dad did. And so someone that was in my house and living in my home for my entire life, who I depended on and who helped us make money and who gave me that father figure in my life, was now no longer there, and I had to grieve that loss. I had to grieve that person that was no longer there fully and who did so much for my life, in all honesty. Well, everyone makes mistakes. I think that he did do some things for me that helped a lot. And I no longer had him there, and so now I was grieving that, and my siblings were grieving that, and so now we're all grieving together because my dad's no longer there. My mom is there and she's stressed out, which makes me stressed out. There's just so much going on. And like you said, it's so messy, especially when children are involved. And so it's interesting to see how like everyone does react to grieving and divorce differently. Depending on the situation, like who was hurt more, who was, I guess, backstabbed more, some people might be relieved and some people might be extremely upset depending on their perspective of things, you know? So, yeah.
For your personal experience, if you don't mind me asking, did you see your parents gradually slipping into this, like slipping into probably getting a divorce, or was it just kind of a blunt, oh my goodness, like I guess they're gonna get divorced now? Like, did you see it at all?
Not really. I knew that my dad wasn't the easiest person to get along with. And it's funny because now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, there obviously were signs that something was happening. But for me, I wasn't really focused on those things. It was like under the table kind of things that I didn't understand. Like I lived with it my entire life. But my mom, on the other hand, she lived a life before marrying my dad, and then she married my dad, and that's a different life, So I had gotten used to his behavior and his, actions, but my mom, wasn't like that. So when he did come up to me, when my dad did come up to me and said, hey, I'm getting, like, your mom wants to divorce me, it was like, what? Like, wait, I don't understand. But at the same time, I knew he wasn't the easiest person to deal with. So in front of him, I was like, okay, if that's what she wants, kind of thing, Right, But in reality, like, I just wanted to break down and be like, well, what does that mean for me? Like,
like what is my future?
Yeah, exactly. It's just completely unknown. And I know it was completely unknown for my mom. She had to take a huge leap and figure out her entire life. Like, after she got divorced, my dad was the main breadwinner, so he was the one going to work. She didn't finish college. She didn't have a degree, So she had to go back to college, which meant that I had to take care of my 6 younger siblings, make sure that they were okay, along with my other siblings. We all kind of had to put in more effort to make sure that the family didn't fall apart. But it was a lot, Yeah.
And I think it's, like you said, you and each of your siblings had to go through your own grieving processes as well. Like, you're not only grieving your parents' separation or divorce, but you're grieving, especially because you and your siblings had to take on this role of, okay, now I have to focus on my family and make sure it doesn't fall apart. You're almost grieving your life before then.
Oh yeah,
because you're almost grieving the lack of responsibility you had before.
That's fact.
And it's really, like, you want to just not have to deal with it. You don't want this responsibility. Like, you just want things to be easygoing and happy-go-lucky and all those things. But
I mean, as children, you never sign up for your parents to just split, You never sign up for taking on more responsibility than you're already given, Right. So that when that does happen, you have this why me mentality. Even if you do believe in God, sometimes it's just like, why? Why did that happen to me, And you're blaming a lot of people. You're blaming yourself. You're blaming everything that's around you except for, the people that you love. Because it's like, well, even the people that you love. I mean, I was like, why did you do this to me? You know, it's just so much. There's so much emotions that go into it, and it's hurtful, and it tears you apart, and it makes you become a different person that you were before. You have to change who you are, what your expectations are, your belief system sometimes too. Like, something that you had once believed in now is like, what the, like, destroyed, and so you're like, holy, what am I supposed to believe? Do I still believe the same thing that I believe in, and it's just, it just changes,
Well, and it turns into like this, like, you're grieving all the things that you did believe in. And then for my own personal experience, like, my parents didn't get divorced, but my mom passed away. Then my dad remarried to my stepmom, who was divorced, and she had 2 girls. And I mean, their divorce was really messy. It was not a good relationship. And those 2 girls, my stepsisters, they're awesome. Love you. Shout out. Shout out, you guys. They had to come into this family. I'm one girl with 4 brothers, and they had to come in never having brothers before. And, like, the oldest girl my older stepsister, she had to come in and be like, oh, I'm not the oldest anymore. Like there's bigger kids than me. And also, like financially, it's different. Rules are different, boundaries, beliefs are different. And you have to adjust all the while trying to figure out how to grieve this relationship you had before. Yeah. Like you're trying to grieve all the things we talked about, that relationship that you saw your parents having, the responsibilities that you had before that maybe you don't have anymore, and adjust to a completely different home, different people that you're living with. And it was hard. It was not a happy-go-lucky place to be in, really, because we were all, and then my family was obviously grieving the death of my mom. So we were all grieving in different ways, trying to mesh it all into this blended family. And it was just messy and it was hard. But then with time,
right?
Time is key, I think.
Yeah,
time,
it is.
Like grief has no timeline. And so if you can accept that right away, you will be in a good spot.
I think so as well.
But yeah, like my family, we're a lot closer now because we realize, oh my gosh, like you're grieving that. That's hard. And that's like, I'm grieving this. Like we're both having a hard time. Like, let's talk about it. And it was really good for us. And I'm super grateful that my family was able to figure it out, even though it was really messy. There is hope. There is hope. If you hear anything from this podcast, there is always hope.
And I think it's interesting, like when you go through divorce, you have different coping mechanisms, different coping styles. And one of those coping styles is to basically talk through your feelings. And some people decide to talk through their feelings with, those that maybe you shouldn't talk with, makes it really difficult. Like if, a parent were to talk to their children about how they're feeling. Unfortunately, while you want to have them involved in the process, it makes it really hard for the children because now they no longer have that feeling of security and stability in their parent, and it makes it really hard for them. So I think a really healthy way of coping is talking to a counselor, talking to extended family, talking to your friends, try to find those healthy relationships that can help you get through, not through your feelings, but work through your feelings, to eventually have a different perspective on your relationship and help change those expectations that you once had regarding your relationships.
Yeah. And along with that, especially having a good support system, knowing who you can talk to about this. Kind of like what you said, you don't want to just ramble to anybody about like the bad things your spouse did, especially your children. You want to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial for you. And rambling about it is, or, just like being negative about it, it's not going to be beneficial for you or anybody else listening. So, it's important to have a good support system that's going to give you the resources and to help you further progress in grieving in a healthy way. Another coping mechanism is just recognizing that it's okay to have different feelings and recognizing that it's okay. Like, you can be totally relieved that you got a divorce, and that's okay. You don't have to feel guilty for being happy about it, because if it was a really toxic, abusive relationship, you're out of it. You got yourself out of a hole. That's good. Like you should be relieved about it. And if you're sad or angry, that is also okay. It's okay to have these emotions. You should let yourself have these emotions, because it is okay to have these feelings. It is natural. It's also important, though, to recognize appropriate moments to have these feelings. Because if you just keep suppressing it and then you're, you're at a restaurant, you're like at McDonald's and you just break down, because they didn't put pickles on your hamburger or something. Like, it's that you shouldn't suppress it.
Yeah.
You should have and allow yourself to have moments to just work through it, and just like let your body hurt for a little bit, and that's okay. That's part of the healing process.
Yeah. It's really hard to do that though. Like, yes. I remember when I was going through it, and I, when I did experience my feelings, and I did show those feelings, I felt like a lot of people didn't want to deal with that, and which is totally understandable. If I saw someone crying on the sidewalk, I probably wouldn't want to walk up to them, and be like, "Hey, are you okay?
Buddy? How's your day going?"
Exactly. So honestly, you can feel really alone during that time when you are trying to express your feelings and emotions, and you feel like no one understands. But that's why, there are groups out there that can help you work through these feelings, and not feel alone. That's why it's so important to do your research and go out there and find people that are going through the same things, or people that have gone through the same things, that are willing to listen. Sometimes you just need an ear. So
someone that will actively listen to you, and even like they listen to you and they don't right away give you advice, but just kind of, you tell them something and then they paraphrase it back to you. That can be really validating.
Yes,
that can be like, oh my gosh, like you are hearing me, like that I am hurting, and that can be super.
And that's for anything, honestly.
For real. For real.
I'm just crying because I'm hungry. I just want my husband to say, "You are hungry." I'm just like, yes.
Thanks, so.
Amen to that. But anyways, another way to cope is just to take care of yourself, emotionally and physically. So whether that is going to a support group, or writing your feelings down in a journal, or talking to someone about it, or getting exercise, releasing those endorphins, feelings of stress. Mm-hmm. Just do what you can to focus on yourself. Help yourself feel loved and appreciated, because I think that's really hard when you're going through a divorce. You feel like, okay, I don't feel loved right now, but reach out to those people that do love you and that are there for you.
And like, it doesn't even have to be like, let's go talk about my divorce for a second. It can be totally, but sometimes you just need a distraction. Sometimes you just need someone to take you out of the feelings.
Do something that you love.
Go get a soda.
What are your hobbies? Go skating, go swimming, go on a hike.
Or even just,
paint,
like go on a drive and just talk to your friend about whatever, like just talk about funny things, or just, sometimes you just need to
take a break.
Take a break from it, and like just understand that you will be happy again. And you can distract yourself. Another coping mechanism, we've talked about a lot of them, but avoid power struggles and arguments with your spouse or your former spouse. If it can be, I think this doesn't just apply to people that have gone through a divorce, but also people in marriage, and even single people. We shouldn't focus on the things we can't control, because if we are trying to put all of our effort into trying to control the things that we just cannot control, it's frustrating, and it's just, it takes away your energy, and then you don't want to. And then really you're not able to control the things you really are able to control, because you were just so focused on all your energy on trying to control these other things, and it just didn't happen. So
change your perspective, change your expectations. Focus your energy on things that you can control, whether that's going to a counselor, whether that's eating healthier, or, going to exercise more, or bonding with your children, or maybe bonding with your friends,
because it can even, especially with divorce, there's a lot of legalities that can be just out of your control. And it is just down to the law, the state law. And it can be really frustrating. But you can, if those are kind of major things, focus on the little things you can control. Like if you're going to a meeting for this, focus on what you're gonna wear. What am I gonna eat for breakfast? What am I gonna eat after?
Yeah,
like what am I
small
gonna do
things
after?
can mean a lot.
Yeah, because it that can give you the confidence and even the optimism you need to just get through those difficult moments of feeling out of control.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that being said, we've listed some coping styles. We've talked about like why you might grieve, why it's hard, and that is totally, understandable. And we just want you guys to know that there are people out there who have gone through the same situation that are struggling, and we'll leave some resources down below for you to hopefully not depend on fully, because you do need to make that effort by yourself to change and learn to live a new life, but
yeah, it's important to understand that this is a fresh start. Things have changed, and that is hard to cope with that change, but this is a new beginning, and this is a new chapter, and it's exciting to start a new chapter, and it's exciting to progress. So we hope that you take the coping mechanisms that we've talked about. We hope the information that we've shared about the history, what our cultures perceive, how our cultures perceive divorce. We hope that these are topics that are more easy to understand as well as more comfortable to talk about, because they should be comfortable. We should establish a more comfortable environment where we can talk about our personal experiences. And we invite you to share your personal experiences about divorce, whether it was really hard and really messy, or whether it was really good and you have a really good relationship. We want this to be a new norm. We don't want just divorce to be the new norm. We want this connection and awareness to be the new norm.
Yeah, so thank you for listening to Good Grief. We'll see you next time, where we talk about infertility. Yeah, and so that should be exciting, but not
sad, but good.
But good. Yes,
it should be good grief.
Good grief. Anyways, so make sure to keep listening and checking in on us.
Thanks.
We will talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.